Vienna, 1886, just as the imperial waltz echoed through Hofburg's marble halls and the chandeliers threw golden light across the polished parquet floor. Countess Celia Prescott stood still as a statue beneath the vaulted ceiling, her gloved fingers twisted tight around a folded program card. The scent of beeswax, lilies, and expensive perfume clung to the air. She wore pale blue satin with ivory beading at the sleeves, her waist corseted to perfection, her hair twisted high and pinned with Austrian sapphires. It was her third season, and her father said if she wasn't engaged by autumn, he'd start entertaining French suitors. She didn't care about French suitors. What she cared about was the painting. It stood behind a velvet rope at the far end of the ballroom, flanked by two imperial guards. A full-length portrait, oil on canvas, still unsigned. A royal commission. The emperor himself had ordered it, and tonight was its first unveiling before it went to auction in Dresden. The subject? Her. She hadn't expected the painter to capture so much. She'd sat for him in silence day after day, in a quiet sunlit chamber above the palace kitchens, never speaking beyond what was necessary. She hadn't dared ask his name, he wasn't noble, and the court had rules about familiarity. But she watched him. The way he adjusted the light. The way his hands, calloused and stained, moved with such care over the canvas. She saw the way he looked at her face, not with hunger or calculation like the dukes and viscounts, but with a kind of reverence. Like she was something real. The curtain dropped. Gasps. A few scattered claps. Her father's sharp intake of breath beside her. Celia's heart thudded hard. It wasn't just the skill. It was what the portrait revealed. Her eyes not demure or distant, but alert, searching. The tilt of her chin, the faint tension in her fingers. It didn't flatter. It told the truth. She knew, instantly, that this man had seen her in ways no one ever had. Unacceptable, her father muttered, jaw clenched. It looks like you're thinking. As if you've a mind of your own. A low chuckle behind them. God forbid, Prescott. A thinking daughter in Vienna? You'll never marry her off. Laughter rippled around them. Celia didn't move. Later, when the guests thinned toward supper, she slipped away from the ballroom. Down the corridor, past the tapestry gallery, up the narrow servants' stair. She paused outside the attic studio door, her breath visible in the cold air. She knocked once. The door opened. He stood there, sleeves rolled, palette in one hand. A streak of ochre across his cheek. Taller than she remembered. His shirt collar open at the throat. Countess, he said, eyes dark and steady. This isn't permitted. I know, she said. But I need to speak to you. He didn't step back. They'll see you. Then let them. She looked past him into the room, easels, brushes, rags, a window open to the city's lights. You painted me like I was real. Not like a bride. Why? He set the palette down. Because you are real. What's your name? He hesitated. Tavian Cross. American? Born in Philadelphia. Trained in Florence. You weren't supposed to show the truth. You were supposed to make me pretty. You are pretty, he said simply. But that's not what you are. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her. Silence. The only light came from the window. She touched a canvas still in progress, another noblewoman, this one unfinished, her face blurred. You didn't sign the portrait, she said. I couldn't. Why? Tavian met her eyes. Because what I painted wasn't just a commission. It was a confession. Celia's throat tightened. Somewhere deep in the palace, strings began the next waltz. Do you know what they plan? She said. They're auctioning it. Along with 3 others. They're calling it the royal auction. The highest bidder wins not just the painting but the subject's first dance at the winter masquerade. Tavian's jaw tensed. Like a prize horse. She nodded. I won't let them, he said. You can't stop it. I can outbid them. You're a painter, Tavian. I sold a portrait last year to the Duke of Argyll for 5,000 francs. I haven't touched the money. Celia stared. You'd spend it all. For one dance? No, he moved closer. For one truth. She stepped back, heart pounding. Her glove caught on the edge of a stool. He caught her wrist gently, steadying her. The touch sparked like fire through silk. I thought I was invisible, she whispered. You were a storm. She didn't let go. Behind them, a knock. Tavian released her instantly. A boy's voice, her cross. Someone from the inner court. They want to speak to you about the auction. Go, Celia said quietly. I'll use the servants' stairs. He touched his fingers to his chest, then stepped out. She ran. The next morning, the Imperial Bulletin listed the 4 royal portraits up for auction. Alongside each name, a list of registered bidders. Tavian Cross's name appeared beside hers and hers alone. Celia's father was furious. Who is he? What right? He's a painter, father, she said evenly. And I suppose he wants a dance. Her father glared. Then he'll pay for it. And after, you'll never see him again. But she would. Because that night, beneath the stone arches of the Schönbrunn orangery, she found a folded note tucked into her tea tray. 3 words, written in charcoal. Duel at dawn. The courtyard behind the painter's quarters was still dark when she arrived. Snow dusted the flagstones. Torches flickered in the wall brackets. Tavian stood waiting, a dueling pistol in his hand. Across from him, a man in full-dress uniform, Baron Erich von Dern, her father's favored suitor. Celia's breath caught. You challenged him, she asked. Yes, Tavian said. For your honor. Erich scoffed. He's a servant. And you insulted a lady, Tavian said coldly. You called her a painted whore. Celia's cheeks flamed. Tavian handed her a sealed envelope. If I don't walk away, give this to the Emperor. No, Tavian. He turned. I won't lose. The steward called the count. 2 shots cracked through the air. Erich collapsed. Tavian stood, smoke curling from his barrel. Behind them, someone shouted. Guards! Celia grabbed Tavian's hand and ran. The snow had begun to fall in earnest by the time Celia and Tavian reached the west passage of the Imperial Botanical Conservatory. The iron gate creaked as Tavian shoved it open with his shoulder, his coat darkened with melting flakes. Celia followed, skirts lifted above her boots, breath sharp in her lungs. Inside, the air was heavy with damp earth and the faint sweetness of orchids. Glass panes steamed with the contrast of frost and hothouse warmth. Tavian paused just beyond the entrance, listening. The silence pressed in. They'll come through the main gate, he said, his voice low and steady. We have minutes. Celia's gloves were soaked through. She peeled them off and tucked them under her bodice. You shot a baron. He insulted you in front of your father. He wanted to humiliate you publicly and win you by diminishing you. Tavian turned, brushing wet curls from his forehead. I knew what I was doing. He may survive, she whispered, though she didn't believe it. Tavian met her eyes. I didn't aim to miss. A pause stretched between them, broken only by the distant clatter of boots on stone. Celia stepped toward the center of the conservatory where the palms arched high above, their fronds dripping with condensation. Where can we go? I have a friend in Chopron. A former apprentice who keeps a vineyard. He owes me more than one favor. Do you trust him? With my life. But we'll need papers to cross the border. She looked at him. And how do we get those? I know someone in the Jewish quarter who forges shipping manifests. He won't speak to nobility, though. Then I'll dress as a servant. You'll be recognized. Not if I'm careful. Tavian didn't answer at first. He walked to a weathered bench beneath a fig tree and sat, his hands braced on his knees. For the first time since the courtyard, his composure cracked slightly. You shouldn't have come with me. You still had a way out. Celia knelt before him, the hem of her gown darkening against the stone. I chose this. I chose you. He looked at her then, not as a subject or an obligation, but as something equal. You don't know what it means to live poor. No, she said. But I know what it means to live in a cage. They sat in silence until a small rustling behind the ferns made them both rise. A girl emerged, a kitchen maid, no more than 12, cheeks flushed from running. She held out a parcel wrapped in oiled cloth. Mr. Cross, she said breathlessly. From the scullery master. He said to give you this, and not to speak to anyone else. Tavian took the bundle and handed the girl a coin. She vanished as quickly as she'd come. Inside the cloth were 2 sets of plain clothes, well worn but clean, a small leather pouch of coins, and a folded map inked with penciled routes. A red mark circled a train depot south of the city. Joseph, Tavian said under his breath. He's still loyal. Celia touched the edge of the map. How far is that depot? 3 hours on foot. Less if we cut through the old vineyard road. She nodded. Then we should leave now. He reached for her cloak, adjusting the hood over her hair. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck, and something in her stilled. Once we pass the border, she said softly, what happens? If we make it, Tavian said, we stop running. And if we don't? Then at least we don't run alone. They left the conservatory through a side door Tavian had used once before to smuggle out pigments. It opened onto an overgrown trail leading toward the orchards. Celia moved quickly, her steps sure despite the dark. Tavian followed close behind, one hand resting on the satchel beneath his coat. In the distance, bells began to toll from the palace chapel, slow and mournful. Celia didn't turn. That's for him. Tavian's expression didn't change. He made his choice. They reached the edge of the orchard where the trees stood bare against the snow, their branches skeletal. Beyond lay the vineyard road, lined with frost-bitten hedgerows and the occasional stone marker. The city lights faded behind them. As they walked, Celia spoke without looking at him. Tell me something true. Something no one else knows. He hesitated, then said, my mother died in childbirth. My father couldn't afford a burial, so he painted her. That was the first portrait I ever saw. I was 5. Celia was quiet a moment. Mine used to sing to me in French. But only when the windows were closed, so no one would hear. The wind picked up, rattling dry branches. Tavian glanced toward the horizon. We'll need to rest before we reach the depot. There's a chapel ruin half a mile ahead. We can shelter there. She nodded. They kept walking. Neither mentioned the weight of what they'd left behind, nor the world that waited ahead. The only sound was the hush of falling snow and the steady rhythm of their footsteps side by side. The chapel ruin stood crooked and half swallowed by ivy, its nave open to the night sky where stars burned through thin clouds. Tavian pushed aside the warped wooden door and stepped into the cold hush, his boots crunching over broken tile and dry leaves. Celia followed, her breath rising in soft clouds. The silence inside was different, older, more watchful. He set down the satchel near what remained of the altar. A rusted candelabra lay on its side, and a shattered stained glass fragment glinted in the moonlight. Celia's gaze lingered on it, a scrap of crimson robe, the hem of some forgotten saint. There's no roof, she said, lowering herself onto a stone ledge. But at least the wind doesn't cut like it did outside. Tavian crouched and unfastened the cloth bundle. From within, he drew out a small flask, 2 apples, and a crust of dark bread wrapped in linen. He offered her one of the apples silently. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. She bit into the fruit and leaned back against the wall, her eyes closed a moment. I once thought I'd die in Vienna. Not dramatically. Just slowly, over years like a candle under glass. He didn't know how to answer that, so he didn't try. Instead, he broke the bread in half and handed her a piece. You'll sleep first, he said. I'll keep watch. Celia tilted her head. You think they'll follow us this far? They'll search the main roads. But if word spread that you ran, someone might be paid to track us. Especially if your father's involved. She studied him in the dim light. Do you think he'd offer a reward? He doesn't need to. The court will do it for him. A soft wind stirred the remnants of ivy along the archway. Somewhere nearby, an owl called once, then fell silent. Celia curled her fingers around the flask and took a careful sip. The liquid burned some kind of plum brandy, sharp and smoky. I've never been drunk, she said, handing it back. You still aren't, Tavian replied. That's just enough to warm your blood. She pulled her knees to her chest. When we reach Chopron. Will I still be Celia Prescott? You'll be whoever you choose, he said. She looked down at the apple core in her hand, then set it aside. And who would I be, if I weren't a countess? He leaned back against the opposite wall, arms loosely crossed. You'd be someone who reads Italian poetry and walks barefoot when no one's watching. Someone who likes bitter coffee and laughs at the wrong moments. Her voice was barely a whisper. You noticed all that? I painted you. She didn't answer, but her gaze didn't waver. Tavian's voice dropped. I never told you why I took the commission. Celia shifted. Because the palace offered you a fortune? No. Because they told me who the subject was. I'd seen you once before, in the gallery at Belvedere. You were looking at a statue of Daphne. Everyone else passed it by, but you stared at her hands, the ones turning to bark. She blinked. I remember that day. I thought I was alone. You were. He paused. But I was there, sketching archways. Celia exhaled slowly. So when they asked you to paint me, I already knew what I wanted to paint. Not your dress. Not your posture. Just the moment before the bark takes hold. She lowered her eyes. That's why my father hates it. Because it's not a performance. They sat quietly, the wind moving over them like a whisper through reeds. A loose stone from the arch above dropped and landed near Celia's foot. She didn't flinch. You haven't asked me what I want, she said. He looked at her. I don't mean where we'll go, or what name I'll use. I mean what I want from you. I didn't think I had the right. Ask. Tavian's voice was careful. What do you want? She stood and crossed the space between them. Not quickly. Not with uncertainty. But with the steadiness of someone who had made peace with every step. I want to know there's a life where I can wake up and not wonder who I have to be that day, she said. I want to walk into a room and not prepare myself to be watched, or weighed, or bartered. Her voice broke slightly. And I want someone who sees me and doesn't look away. He rose slowly, his hands still loose at his sides. Then stay with me. Not just until the border. Not just until the danger passes. She reached for his hand. I wasn't planning to leave. Outside, the wind shifted again, and a flurry of snow swept through the broken arch. It caught in her hair, melted along the collar of his coat. He brushed it away, gently, carefully, as if even that small gesture might be too much. I don't know how to build a life, he said. I've only ever drifted toward one. Then we'll build one together, she said, and this time, there was no hesitation. He drew her into his arms, and the chapel held its breath. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just the quiet joining of two people who had nothing left to lose but everything left to create. In the distance, a train whistle echoed faintly, far to the south. The first sign of the morning. They reached the border just past dusk 2 days later, after crossing the frozen fields of Begenland beneath a sky streaked with copper and ash. Celia's borrowed cloak was stiff with cold, and Tavian's boots had split at the heel, but neither spoke of it. The train depot in the town of Kafaza loomed ahead, its switch tower silhouetted against the last of the light. A single lantern burned above the cargo office, casting long shadows over the snow-packed yard. They waited behind a stack of wooden crates as the last freight car rattled eastward. When the stationmaster's whistled tune faded into the wind, Tavian stood and adjusted the satchel over his shoulder. "The railman Joseph marked on the map works the night shift," he said, eyes fixed on the depot's narrow side door. "If we go now, we'll find him alone." Celia nodded, pulling her hood lower. Her cheeks were raw from the cold, and a faint bruise had begun to bloom beneath her left knee from a fall crossing a frozen brook earlier that morning. She did not mention it. Her gaze was on the siding, where a cluster of Hungarian peasants waited with crates of wool and dried apples, their silence wary. Inside, the air was thick with coal dust and the scent of boiled cabbage. The stationmaster glanced up as they entered, his eyes narrowing when they settled on Celia. He said nothing, only nudged a chair aside with his boot and turned back to the ledger on his desk. "You're Joseph's cousin?" Tavian asked in Hungarian. The man didn't look up. "You're late. We had to avoid the main roads." He took a long drag from his stub of a cigarette, then exhaled into the ledger. "Names?" Tavian pulled a folded slip of paper from his coat. "Anton and Mira Long. Traveling to Chopron to assist with a cousin's vineyard. No return ticket." The stationmaster examined the paper, then grunted. "If you're caught, I never saw you." He stood, pulled 2 narrow slips from a drawer, and stamped them with a rusted seal. As he passed them over, his hand brushed Celia's. He paused. "You're not from Kosig," he said. Celia met his gaze. "No." He studied her face a moment longer, then dropped his arm. "Train leaves in 20 minutes. Car 4 is empty." They stepped back into the cold, slipping through the shadows. The platform was nearly deserted. A pair of soldiers leaned against the far wall, smoking and muttering in low voices. Tavian kept Celia behind him as they moved toward the rear car. When she stepped onto the metal footplate, her hands trembled from more than just the cold. Inside, the bench seats were splintered and uneven. A cracked window let in a thin draft, but it was quiet. Celia sat and folded her hands in her lap. Tavian remained standing, eyes on the door. "We'll be across the border in less than an hour," he said. "After that, we're beyond their reach." Celia looked out the window. "What will you do when we have nothing left to run from?" He didn't answer at first. "Then, I'll paint again. Not for galleries. Not for coin. Just for the sake of it." "And me?" He turned toward her. "You'll be more than a face on canvas." She studied him in the dim light. "I want to be something that doesn't need permission." "You already are." Outside, the whistle sounded. The train lurched forward. They didn't speak again until the fields gave way to the low hills of western Hungary. Celia's head rested against the rattling pane, her eyes half closed. Tavian sat across from her, watching the way her fingers curled into the folds of her skirt when she drifted toward sleep. "My mother was the reason I was sent to Vienna," Celia murmured, eyes still closed. "Not my father. She thought if I entered the court, I'd learn to survive it." "And did you?" "No," she said. "But I learned to want something else." The train groaned as it rounded a bend. Celia sat up, brushing hair from her cheek. "I never asked what you'd have done if I'd refused to run," she said. "I wouldn't have left," Tavian said. "I'd have stayed and painted until they threw me from the palace." "And then?" I'd have painted you from memory. She smiled, slow and quiet. You'd have remembered the wrong things. I doubt that. The train slowed as it neared Chopron's outer station. Tavian stood and reached for the satchel. Celia rose too, though her legs ached from stillness. She steadied herself with a hand on the bench. As they stepped onto the platform, the conductor gave them only a passing glance. The town was quiet, the streets lit by oil lamps and the faint glow of hearth fires behind shuttered windows. They walked south, toward the vineyard marked on the map. Snow crunched beneath their boots, and a dog barked once in the distance. The hills rose gently here, dotted with leafless vines that curled like ink across parchment. Stone pillars flanked the vineyard gate. Tavian paused, lifting the rusted latch. The wooden door creaked open. A man waited near the barn, holding a lantern. He was broad-shouldered, with a faded scarf knotted at his throat. He eyed them both, then stepped forward. You're late, he said. Tavian offered his hand. Still loyal? The man took it. Always. He gestured to the house beyond. There's bread and stew on the stove. A room upstairs is clean. Celia's breath caught. The scent of thyme and wood smoke drifted from the open door. As they stepped inside, past the warmth and the low burning fire, Tavian looked at her. You're safe now. She held his gaze. No, she said. We are.